The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval base as Admiral James Morrison walked through the medical facility. His crisp white uniform bore the weight of 30 years of service, each medal and stripe telling a story of dedication to his country. At 55, he had seen enough wounded soldiers to last several lifetimes, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to witness in room 247. Dr. Sarah Chen had been working at the Naval Medical Center for 8 years. She was known for her gentle touch and unwavering commitment to her patients. Today felt different somehow, as if the universe was aligning events that would change everything she thought she knew about healing and human resilience. The patient in room 247 was listed simply as Lieutenant Maria Santos, age 28, combat injuries. The report was brief, clinical, and revealed nothing about the extraordinary woman lying in the hospital bed. Maria had arrived 3 days earlier, unconscious and barely breathing, her body bearing wounds that spoke of unimaginable suffering. Admiral Morrison had come to visit wounded personnel, as was his weekly tradition. He believed deeply in honoring those who had sacrificed for their country. Walking down the sterile corridor, he nodded to nurses and doctors, his presence bringing both comfort and authority to the medical wing. Dr. Chen was checking Maria's vitals when she heard the familiar sound of military boots approaching. She glanced up to see Admiral Morrison standing in the doorway, his expression serious but kind. "Doctor, how is Lieutenant Santos progressing?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of genuine concern. "She's been drifting in and out of consciousness," Dr. Chen replied, adjusting the foreline. "Her injuries are extensive, but she's showing remarkable signs of recovery. Her will to live is extraordinary." Maria's eyes fluttered open at the sound of voices. Through the haze of medication and pain, she recognized the uniform of a high-ranking officer. Years of military training kicked in, and, despite her weakened state, she attempted to show proper respect. "Sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Admiral Morrison stepped closer to her bedside, his weathered face softening with compassion. "Rest easy, Lieutenant. You're safe now. You've done enough." But Maria struggled to sit up slightly, wincing with each movement. The pain medication made everything feel distant and dreamlike, but her military discipline remained sharp. She knew she needed to report what had happened, what she had endured, what she had witnessed. Dr. Chen moved to help her, but Maria raised a trembling hand. "Sir, I need to tell you something. About what happened out there. About what they did to us." Her words came in short bursts, interrupted by difficult breathing. Admiral Morrison pulled a chair closer to her bed. In his decades of service, he had learned that sometimes the most important intelligence came not from formal reports, but from the broken whispers of survivors. "Take your time, Lieutenant. I'm listening." Maria's eyes grew distant as she began to remember. The mission had started as routine reconnaissance. Her unit of 12 soldiers had been deployed to gather intelligence on enemy movements in a remote mountain region. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, but they were well trained and confident in their abilities. "We were supposed to be in and out in 72 hours, Maria continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But something went wrong from the beginning. Our communications equipment malfunctioned on the second day. We couldn't reach base camp." Admiral Morrison listened intently, occasionally glancing at Dr. Chen, who was monitoring Maria's vital signs with growing concern. The young lieutenant's heart rate was increasing as she relived the traumatic events. "On the third day, we encountered a group of civilians," Maria said, her hands beginning to tremble. "Families with children. They were fleeing from something, but we couldn't understand their language completely. They kept pointing back toward the mountains, fear in their eyes." The memory was becoming clearer now, despite the medication. Maria remembered the exact moment when everything changed. Sergeant Williams, their unit leader, had made the decision to escort the civilians to safety rather than abandon them to whatever they were running from. We found a small village that had been completely destroyed, Maria continued. Buildings burned, personal belongings scattered everywhere. But no bodies. That's when we knew we were walking into something much bigger than our original mission. Admiral Morrison leaned forward slightly. He had read preliminary reports about missing units in that region, but nothing had prepared him for what he was hearing. What happened next, Lieutenant? Maria closed her eyes, and, for a moment, Dr. Chen thought she might have drifted back into unconsciousness. But then, she opened them again, and there was a determination there that spoke of inner strength forged in the crucible of survival. They took us on the fourth night, she said simply. We had set up camp in what we thought was a secure location. Our sentries never even had a chance to raise an alarm. These weren't regular soldiers we were dealing with. They moved like ghosts. The capture had been swift and brutally efficient. Maria described waking up in complete darkness, her hands bound behind her back, the taste of blood in her mouth. Around her, she could hear the muffled sounds of her fellow soldiers, all of them confused and frightened. They kept us in an underground facility, Maria said, her voice now barely above a whisper. I never saw daylight for weeks. Maybe months. Time stopped meaning anything down there. Admiral Morrison felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. He had heard whispers of black sites and unofficial detention facilities, but this was the first direct testimony he had encountered. Lieutenant, did you see any identifying markers? Uniforms? Symbols? Maria shook her head slowly. They were very careful about that. But they spoke multiple languages fluently. This wasn't some local militia group. These people had resources, training, organization. Dr. Chen noticed that Maria's breathing was becoming more labored as she continued her story. The emotional stress of reliving these events was taking a physical toll on her already weakened body. She made a note to discuss pain management adjustments with the nursing staff. What they wanted from us wasn't information about our mission, Maria continued. They wanted to break us down completely. To see how much a human being could endure before losing all sense of self. The experiments, as Maria called them, began almost immediately after their capture. Her fellow soldiers were separated into different sections of the facility. She could sometimes hear their screams echoing through the concrete corridors, but she never saw most of them again. They started with sleep deprivation, Maria explained. Constant bright lights, loud noises, temperature changes. Just when your body would start to adapt, they would change everything again. Admiral Morrison had undergone resistance training early in his career, but what Maria was describing went far beyond anything in official military protocols. This was systematic torture designed not just to extract information, but to destroy the human spirit completely. After a few weeks of that, they moved on to more direct methods, Maria said, her voice becoming even quieter. That's when they started working on our bodies. She paused, looking directly at Admiral Morrison. Even through the medication and exhaustion, her eyes held a clarity that was both haunting and inspiring. Sir, I need to show you something. You need to understand what we're really dealing with. Dr. Chen stepped forward, concerned about Maria's elevated stress levels. Lieutenant, perhaps we should continue this conversation when you've had more rest. But Maria was already moving, slowly and painfully pushing herself up in the hospital bed. No, doctor. The Admiral needs to see this now. People need to know what's happening to our soldiers. With deliberate movements that clearly caused her significant pain, Maria began to lift the hospital gown. Admiral Morrison, unsure of what to expect, remained seated but alert. His years of military service had exposed him to many disturbing sights, but something in Maria's demeanor suggested this would be different. As the fabric rose, the first thing visible were bandages wrapped around her torso. But, as she continued lifting the gown, older injuries became apparent. Scars crisscrossed her abdomen in patterns that were clearly not the result of combat or accidents. They were very precise, Maria said matter-of-factly. Everything they did was calculated to cause maximum pain while keeping us alive and conscious. The scars told a story of systematic brutality that went far beyond anything Admiral Morrison had encountered in his military career. Some appeared to be surgical in nature, others looked like they had been inflicted with heated instruments. Dr. Chen had seen these injuries during Maria's initial examination, but witnessing them again in this context, as part of Maria's testimony, made them even more disturbing. The medical team had spent hours documenting and treating these wounds, but the full implications were only now becoming clear. "But this isn't the worst of it," Maria said, her hands moving to the bandages around her ribcage. "What they did to me here, this is what you really need to see." Admiral Morrison realized he was holding his breath. In all his years of service, through multiple deployments and countless briefings about enemy capabilities, nothing had prepared him for this moment. He was about to witness evidence of something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the conflicts his country was engaged in. Maria's fingers worked slowly at the medical tape holding the bandages in place. Each movement caused visible pain, but her determination never wavered. "They told me that no one would ever believe what happened to us. That even if I survived, people would think I was making it all up." The first layer of bandaging came away, revealing more underneath. The medical team had been thorough in their wound care, but as each layer was removed, the extent of Maria's injuries became more apparent. "They were wrong about that," Maria said, looking directly at Admiral Morrison. "Because you're going to believe me. And you're going to do something about it." Admiral Morrison nodded slowly, understanding that he was about to see something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. But he also understood that this young woman's courage in sharing her story was an act of service that went far beyond her original military duties. "Show me, Lieutenant," he said quietly. "Show me what they did to you." As Maria prepared to reveal the full extent of her injuries, the room seemed to grow quieter. Even the usual sounds of the hospital faded into the background. Dr. Chen checked the door to ensure their privacy, understanding instinctively that what was about to be revealed was not just medical information, but intelligence that could have far-reaching implications. The final layer of bandaging began to come away from Maria's ribcage. Admiral Morrison steeled himself for what he was about to see, knowing that this moment would mark a turning point not just in his understanding of the current conflict, but in his approach to military leadership. Maria's story was far from over, but already it was clear that her survival and escape represented something extraordinary. The scars she was about to reveal would tell the rest of the story, providing evidence of human resilience in the face of unimaginable cruelty, and proof of enemy capabilities that went far beyond what anyone in the military hierarchy had previously understood. The afternoon sun continued to stream through the hospital window, casting everything in a golden light that seemed incongruous with the darkness of the story being told. But Maria Santos, lieutenant in the United States Navy, survivor of months of captivity and torture, was finally home. And her testimony was about to change everything. The final bandage fell away from Maria's ribcage, and Admiral Morrison felt his breath catch in his throat. What he saw defied everything he understood about human cruelty and medical possibility. Carved into the flesh around her ribs were symbols and marks that had clearly been made with surgical precision. But these weren't random cuts or torture marks. They formed a deliberate pattern, almost like a code. Dr. Chen moved closer, her professional training overriding her emotional response. She had treated these wounds for days, but seeing them in this context, as evidence rather than just injuries requiring medical care, gave them new significance. "They called it mapping," Maria said, her voice steady despite the obvious pain of revealing these deeply personal wounds. Each mark corresponds to a different type of experiment they performed. They wanted to keep track of their work. Admiral Morrison leaned forward, studying the intricate scarring. Some of the marks were clearly burns, others appeared to be surgical incisions that had been allowed to heal without proper medical care. But the most disturbing aspect was the systematic nature of it all. This wasn't random violence. It was organized, documented, scientific. "How long were you held, Lieutenant?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. 7 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, Maria replied without hesitation. "I kept track by watching the guards. They worked in shifts, and I learned to count the changes." During those months, Maria had endured procedures that seemed designed to test the limits of human endurance. The facility where she was held operated like a twisted medical research center, with her and her fellow soldiers serving as unwilling test subjects. They were particularly interested in pain tolerance and psychological breaking points, Maria continued. Each of these marks represents a different threshold they were trying to identify. She pointed to a series of small, circular scars near her lowest rib. These were electrical burns. They wanted to see how much electrical stimulation a person could withstand before losing consciousness. Admiral Morrison felt a rage building inside him that he hadn't experienced since his early days in combat. But he forced himself to remain calm and professional. Maria needed him to listen, not react emotionally. Dr. Chen was taking notes, documenting not just the medical aspects of what she was seeing, but also the intelligence value of Maria's testimony. As a naval medical officer, she understood that this information could be crucial for developing rescue protocols and treatment procedures for other captured personnel. "The surgical marks here," Maria said, indicating a series of longer scars that ran parallel to her ribs. These were from procedures where they would make incisions and, then, monitor healing rates under different conditions. Sometimes with medical care, sometimes without. The level of systematic cruelty was beyond anything Admiral Morrison had encountered in his military career. But what struck him most was Maria's clinical detachment as she described these experiences. She had found a way to survive psychologically by treating her own suffering as data to be analyzed and reported. "Lieutenant, how many other soldiers were held with you?" Admiral Morrison asked. Maria's expression darkened. "We started with 12 from my unit. By the time I escaped, I knew of only 3 others who were still alive." The fate of her fellow soldiers was something Maria had carried with her through every day of captivity. She had been separated from most of them early in their imprisonment, but the sounds that echoed through the facility told their own story. "Sergeant Williams lasted about 4 months, Maria said. "He was in the cell next to mine for the first few weeks. They were particularly interested in breaking down leadership structures, so they focused on him heavily." Admiral Morrison knew Sergeant Williams from his service record. He had been a decorated soldier with 2 tours of duty and commendations for bravery. The thought of such a man being systematically destroyed was almost unbearable. Corporal Jackson was moved to a different section after about 6 weeks, Maria continued. "But I could still hear him sometimes. They were using him for different experiments. Something to do with sensory deprivation and psychological conditioning." Dr. Chen noticed that Maria's vital signs were spiking as she discussed her fellow soldiers. The emotional trauma of survivor's guilt was clearly taking a toll on her already weakened system. "Maria," Dr. Chen said gently, "we can continue this conversation later if you need to rest." But Maria shook her head firmly. "No, Doctor. The Admiral needs to hear all of this now. There are still people there. Other soldiers from different units. Maybe civilians too." The possibility that the facility was still operational, still holding prisoners, added urgency to everything Maria was telling them. This wasn't just a debrief about past events. This was actionable intelligence that could save lives. "Tell me about your escape, Lieutenant," Admiral Morrison said. "How did you get out?" Maria's expression changed, and, for the first time since beginning her story, she showed something that might have been pride. "They made a mistake. After 7 months, they started to believe their own propaganda about breaking me down completely. The escape had been planned over weeks, using skills from her military training that her captors had apparently underestimated. Despite the physical and psychological torture, Maria had maintained her tactical thinking and situational awareness. "They moved me to a different part of the facility for what they called the final phase," Maria explained. "It was supposed to be where they would complete their psychological conditioning experiments. But the new location had security weaknesses that Maria was quick to identify. The guards were more complacent, assuming that after 7 months of captivity, she posed no threat. I had been mapping the facility in my mind since the first day," Maria said. "Every sound, every smell, every vibration. I knew how many guards were on duty at different times, when shift changes occurred, or the exits were located." Admiral Morrison was impressed by Maria's methodical approach to gathering intelligence even while enduring torture. It spoke to the quality of military training she had received, but, more importantly, to her personal strength and determination. "The opportunity came during a storm," Maria continued. "The power grid serving the facility was unstable, and they were having problems with their electronic security systems. During a particularly severe thunderstorm, the facility's backup generators had failed temporarily. In the confusion and darkness, Maria had managed to overpower a guard and escape from her cell. I knew I had maybe 20 minutes before they would discover I was missing," Maria said. "The facility was built into a mountain, so there was only one way out that I knew of. The escape route led through a series of natural caves that connected to the main facility. Maria had heard other prisoners being moved through these areas and had mentally mapped the pathways based on sound and air circulation patterns. I was barefoot and wearing only a prison uniform," Maria said. "But I had been planning this for months. I knew exactly where to go." The journey through the caves had been treacherous. In complete darkness, with injuries that made every movement painful, Maria had navigated by touch and memory alone. But her military survival training had prepared her for exactly this type of situation. "It took me 6 hours to reach the outside," Maria said. "When I finally saw daylight, I thought I might be hallucinating." But her escape was only the beginning of another ordeal. The facility was located in a remote mountain region, hundreds of miles from any known friendly forces. Maria was injured, exhausted, and had no food, water, or equipment. "I knew that staying near the facility was dangerous," Maria said. "They would be organizing search parties. But I also knew that moving too far too fast would kill me." For the next 3 weeks, Maria had survived in the wilderness using skills from her survival training. She avoided populated areas, knowing that her captors might have contacts among local civilians. "I followed waterways and stayed in heavy forest cover," Maria said. "At night, I would move closer to villages and try to find food, but I never made contact with people." The constant fear of recapture had driven her to extreme caution. Even when she encountered what appeared to be friendly civilians, Maria had maintained her distance, not knowing who could be trusted. "After about 2 weeks, I started to see military aircraft," Maria said. But they weren't flying search patterns. They were conducting regular missions. This observation had given Maria hope that she was moving in the right direction, toward areas controlled by friendly forces. But it had also presented new challenges in making contact without being shot as a potential threat. "I had lost a lot of weight, and I looked like anything but a U.S. Navy lieutenant," Maria said with a weak smile. "I knew that approaching a military patrol could be just as dangerous as being recaptured. The final breakthrough had come when Maria observed a small forward operating base from a distance. She had spent 2 days watching the patterns of patrols and guard rotations before determining the best way to make contact. I waited until dawn, when visibility was good, but the guards might be tired from night duty, Maria said. Then, I walked out of the tree line with my hands visible and started reciting my name, rank, and serial number. The first soldiers to encounter her had been skeptical, to say the least. A woman claiming to be a Navy lieutenant, appearing out of the wilderness after months of being missing, with obvious signs of torture and malnutrition, was not something they encountered every day. It took 3 days of questioning before anyone would believe my story, Maria said. And, even then, they were treating me as much like a security risk as a rescued prisoner. Admiral Morrison understood the caution of the field commanders. In modern warfare, the possibility of enemy agents using sophisticated cover stories was always a concern. But he also felt anger at the additional trauma Maria had been subjected to after her escape. The medical team that first examined me was professional but skeptical, Maria continued. They documented my injuries but seemed to think I might be making up the more extreme details. Dr. Chen winced at this information. The medical community had protocols for treating torture victims, but it was clear that Maria's case had challenged the assumptions of the first responders. It wasn't until they ran my fingerprints and DNA that people started to take my story seriously, Maria said. And even then, I could see doubt in their eyes when I described the facility and what happened there. Admiral Morrison realized that Maria's credibility had been undermined by the very extremity of what she had endured. The tortures she described were so systematic and brutal that they challenged people's assumptions about what human beings were capable of inflicting on each other. That's why I needed to show you this, Maria said, gesturing to the scars on her ribs. Physical evidence that can't be explained away or dismissed as psychological trauma. As Maria began to lower her hospital gown, Admiral Morrison was struck by the courage it had taken for her to reveal these deeply personal injuries. But he was also beginning to understand the larger implications of what she had told him. "Lieutenant, do you believe the facility where you were held is still operational?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Maria replied without hesitation. "When I escaped, they were bringing in new prisoners. I could hear vehicles arriving at night, voices of people who were clearly just arriving." The possibility that other soldiers were currently enduring what Maria had survived added immediate urgency to the situation. This was no longer just a debrief about past events. This was actionable intelligence that required immediate response. Dr. Chen was completing her notes when Admiral Morrison stood up. "Lieutenant Santos, you have provided invaluable service to your country today. Your courage in sharing this information will help us protect other soldiers." But, even as he spoke those words, Admiral Morrison was already thinking about the complex challenges ahead. Organizing a rescue mission to a remote, heavily defended facility based on the testimony of a single survivor would require careful planning and significant resources. "Sir," Maria said as the Admiral prepared to leave, "there's more. Things I haven't told you yet about how the facility operates, who runs it, where the funding comes from." Admiral Morrison paused at the doorway. He realized that this conversation was far from over, and that Maria's story would likely have implications that extended far beyond military operations. "We'll continue this tomorrow, Lieutenant," he said. "Rest now. You've done enough for today." As Admiral Morrison left the medical facility, his mind was racing with the implications of what he had heard and seen. Maria Santos's testimony represented not just the account of a survivor, but intelligence that could reshape his understanding of the current conflict and the capabilities of enemy forces. The scars on her ribs would remain etched in his memory, but, more importantly, they would serve as evidence that would be impossible for anyone to dismiss or explain away. The systematic nature of the torture, the medical precision of the procedures, the organized structure of the facility, all of this pointed to an enemy with resources and capabilities that had been seriously underestimated. Walking across the naval base in the late afternoon sun, Admiral Morrison began to formulate plans for the complex operations that would be required to respond to Maria's intelligence. But, first, he needed to ensure that her story was properly documented and that she received the care and respect she deserved as both a survivor and a source of crucial information. The next morning arrived with an unusual sense of urgency at the naval base. Admiral Morrison had spent most of the night reviewing classified files and making secure phone calls to intelligence officers at various levels of command. Maria Santos's testimony had opened doors to investigations that had been stalled for months. Dr. Chin arrived at the hospital earlier than usual, her mind still processing the extraordinary revelations from the previous day. She had submitted her initial medical report, but she knew that Maria's case would require ongoing documentation that went far beyond standard patient care protocols. Maria herself had slept better than she had in weeks. For the first time since her escape, someone in authority had listened to her complete story and believed every word. The relief of finally being heard was almost as healing as the medical treatment she was receiving. Admiral Morrison entered room 247 at precisely 0800 hours, accompanied by two other officers that Maria didn't recognize. Their presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room from medical to military. "Lieutenant Santos," Admiral Morrison said formally, "I'd like you to meet Colonel Rebecca Hayes from Naval Intelligence and Major David Kim from the Defense Intelligence Agency. They're here to help us understand the full scope of what you experienced." Maria straightened in her hospital bed, her military training automatically taking over despite her injuries. "Yes, sir." Colonel Hayes stepped forward, her expression serious but kind. "Lieutenant, Admiral Morrison has briefed us on your situation. We need to gather more detailed information about the facility where you were held and the people who operated it." During the night, Admiral Morrison had discovered that Maria's testimony correlated with several other intelligence reports that had previously been dismissed or filed away as unverified. Suddenly, patterns were emerging that suggested a much larger operation than anyone had suspected. "Sir, yesterday I mentioned that there was more information about how the facility operates," Maria said. "I think you need to understand the scope of what we're dealing with." Major Kim opened a digital tablet and prepared to take notes. "Lieutenant, can you tell us about the command structure of the facility? Who appeared to be in charge?" Maria had thought about this question many times during her captivity. Despite being held prisoner, her military training had led her to observe and analyze the organizational structure of her captors. There were clearly multiple levels of authority, Maria began. "The guards who watched us day to day were mostly local recruits, I think. They spoke the regional language and seemed unfamiliar with some of the more sophisticated equipment. But, above these local guards was a different class of personnel entirely. These individuals spoke multiple languages fluently, had extensive medical and technical knowledge, and gave orders to everyone else in the facility. The people conducting the experiments were definitely not local militia," Maria continued. "They had advanced medical training, possibly military background, and access to equipment that would cost millions of dollars." Colonel Hayes leaned forward with interest. This description matched intelligence reports about sophisticated enemy operations that combined military objectives with what appeared to be medical or scientific research. "Did you observe any identifying marks, uniforms, or symbols that might indicate their nationality or organizational affiliation?" Colonel Hayes asked. Maria had spent months studying every detail of her captor's appearance and behavior. They were very careful about maintaining operational security. No obvious national symbols or military insignia. But their equipment and procedures suggested multiple countries were involved. The facility operated with a level of international coordination that implied significant resources and planning. Maria had observed personnel who appeared to be from at least 3 different countries, all working together with a level of cooperation that suggested long-term partnerships. The medical equipment was from different manufacturers, Maria said. Some German, some Japanese, some that I couldn't identify. But all of it was extremely sophisticated and recently manufactured. Major Kim looked up from his tablet. Lieutenant, did you observe any patterns in their experimental protocols? Were they following established medical research procedures? This question touched on one of the most disturbing aspects of Maria's captivity. Her torturers had not been randomly cruel. They had been conducting systematic research with specific objectives and careful documentation. They kept detailed records of everything, Maria said. Heart rates, blood pressure, psychological responses, healing rates. Every procedure was filmed and documented. The realization that her torture had been recorded was something Maria had tried not to think about during her recovery. But she knew this information could be crucial for understanding the enemy's capabilities and objectives. They were definitely building a database of information about human responses to different types of stress and trauma, Maria continued. This wasn't random torture. This was organized research. Dr. Chen, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up. Lieutenant, the scarring patterns we've documented, were those made according to some kind of protocol? Maria nodded grimly. Each mark represents a different variable they were testing. Pain tolerance, healing rates, psychological breaking points. The marks were their way of tracking which experiments had been performed on each subject. Colonel Hayes was taking detailed notes. How many other prisoners did you estimate were held at the facility during your time there? At any given time, maybe 30 to 40 people, Maria replied. But the population was constantly changing. People were brought in, and people were removed. The fate of those who were removed was something Maria preferred not to speculate about in detail. But the implications were clear to everyone in the room. I was held there longer than most, Maria continued. I think they were particularly interested in long-term psychological conditioning experiments. Most other prisoners seemed to be there for shorter periods. Admiral Morrison had been listening carefully to this exchange, and a disturbing picture was emerging. This wasn't just a military detention facility or even a torture center. It was a research institution using human subjects to develop techniques and gather data for unknown purposes. Lieutenant, did you ever observe any indication of what they planned to do with the information they were gathering? Admiral Morrison asked. Maria had thought about this question throughout her captivity and during her recovery. Based on conversations I overheard, I believe they were developing enhanced interrogation techniques and psychological conditioning methods. But there were also indications that the research had applications beyond military intelligence. Some of the experiments seemed designed to test basic human physiological and psychological limits under controlled conditions. They talked about applications for civilian populations, Maria said quietly. Methods for controlling large groups of people, techniques for breaking down social structures and resistance movements. The room fell silent as the implications of this information sank in. What Maria was describing went far beyond military torture or prisoner abuse. This was research into systematic methods for controlling human behavior on a potentially massive scale. Major Kim cleared his throat. Lieutenant, do you believe you could provide enough geographic and architectural details about the facility to support a rescue mission? This was the question Maria had been both hoping for and dreading. She desperately wanted to help rescue any prisoners who might still be held at the facility. But she also knew that a failed rescue attempt could result in the deaths of everyone being held there. Yes, sir, Maria said without hesitation. I memorized every detail I could about the layout, security systems, guard rotations, and access routes. During her months of captivity, Maria had mentally mapped every corridor, counted every door, timed every guard change. What had started as a survival mechanism had evolved into a comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation. The facility is built into a natural cave system, Maria explained. Most of the detention and experimental areas are underground, but there are surface buildings for administration and housing for the personnel. She described a complex that was much larger than anyone had imagined. The underground portions extended deep into the mountain, with multiple levels and specialized areas for different types of activities. The main prisoner housing area is on the second underground level, Maria continued. But there are deeper levels that I never saw. I could hear machinery and vehicles operating down there, suggesting significant additional facilities. Colonel Hayes was creating a rough diagram based on Maria's descriptions. How many access points did you observe? I knew of 3 surface entrances, Maria replied. The main vehicle entrance where prisoners were brought in, a smaller personnel entrance used by staff, and the emergency exit I used to escape. But Maria suspected there were additional entrances she had never seen. The logistics of operating such a large facility would require multiple access points for supplies, equipment, and personnel. The security was sophisticated but not impenetrable, Maria said. Electronic systems, armed guards, surveillance cameras. But they were overconfident about their location and the psychological condition of their prisoners. Admiral Morrison was beginning to formulate preliminary plans for a potential rescue operation. But he also understood that such a mission would require extensive intelligence gathering and careful planning. Lieutenant, I need to ask you something difficult, Admiral Morrison said. Are you prepared to work with our intelligence and special operations personnel to plan a rescue mission? It would mean reliving these experiences in great detail. Maria didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. Whatever it takes to get our people out of there. Dr. Chen looked concerned about the psychological impact of such intense debriefing sessions on Maria's recovery. Admiral, Lieutenant Santos is still recovering from severe physical and emotional trauma. Extended interrogations could seriously impact her healing process. But Maria shook her head firmly. Doctor, I appreciate your concern, but those people are still there. Right now, while we're talking, they're being tortured and experimented on. My healing can wait. The determination in Maria's voice reminded everyone in the room that despite everything she had endured, she remained a soldier with a mission to complete. Her personal recovery was important, but it was secondary to her duty to help rescue her fellow prisoners. Colonel Hayes closed her notebook and looked at Admiral Morrison. Sir, I recommend we establish a joint task force immediately. This intelligence is too valuable and time-sensitive to process through normal channels. Admiral Morrison nodded. Agreed. Major Kim, I want you to coordinate with Special Operations Command. We need to start planning for multiple contingencies. But even as they discussed operational planning, everyone in the room understood the enormous challenges ahead. A rescue mission to a remote, heavily defended facility would require perfect execution and considerable resources. Lieutenant Santos, Admiral Morrison said, you should know that what you're doing goes far beyond your normal military duties. Your courage in sharing this information and your willingness to continue helping despite your injuries represents the highest traditions of naval service. Maria managed a weak smile. Sir, I'm just trying to bring my people home. As the meeting concluded, Admiral Morrison realized that Maria Santos had already become much more than a rescued prisoner or a source of intelligence. She had become a symbol of human resilience and military dedication that would inspire the complex operations ahead. Dr. Chen remained behind as the officers prepared to leave. Maria, I want you to know that I'll be monitoring your condition carefully throughout this process. If at any point the stress becomes too much, we can adjust the schedule. "Thank you, Doctor," Maria replied. "But I need to see this through. Those people saved my life during the worst moments of captivity by giving me something to hope for. Now it's my turn to save them." Outside room 247, Admiral Morrison was already making phone calls to initiate the most complex rescue operation of his career. But he was also thinking about the broader implications of Maria's testimony. If such facilities existed, if enemies possessed such sophisticated capabilities for human experimentation and control, then the nature of modern warfare was more complex and more dangerous than anyone had fully understood. The scars on Maria's ribs represented not just evidence of her personal suffering, but proof of enemy capabilities that would require fundamental changes in how military and intelligence operations were planned and executed. The war they thought they were fighting was apparently only a small part of a much larger conflict. As afternoon approached, Maria prepared herself for the intensive debriefing sessions that would follow. She knew that the next few days would be among the most difficult of her life. But she also knew that somewhere in a remote mountain facility, prisoners were counting on her to remember every detail that might help bring them home. The battle for her own survival was over. Now the battle to save others was about to begin. 3 weeks after Maria's initial testimony, the Joint Task Force had grown into one of the most complex military operations in recent history. The conference room at Naval Intelligence Headquarters buzzed with activity as officers from multiple branches of service coordinated rescue plans based on Maria's detailed intelligence. Maria herself had become the center of an intensive debriefing process that tested her memory and emotional resilience daily. Despite Dr. Chen's concerns about her physical recovery, Maria had insisted on participating in every planning session, providing crucial details that only she could supply. Admiral Morrison stood before a large display screen showing satellite imagery of the remote mountain region where Maria had been held. After weeks of analysis, intelligence teams had identified several possible locations that matched her descriptions. "Lieutenant Santos," Admiral Morrison said, "we've narrowed down the potential sites to 3 locations. We need you to look at these images and help us determine which one matches the facility where you were held." Maria approached the screen, studying the terrain features and building layouts. After months of planning her escape, she had memorized every geographic detail around the facility. The process of identification would be crucial for mission success. "This one," Maria said without hesitation, pointing to the middle image. "The rock formations here match what I saw during my escape. And the building configuration is correct." Colonel Hayes made notes as Maria explained her reasoning. "The main building is positioned exactly as I remembered it, with the vehicle entrance facing downhill toward what looks like a supply road." The confirmation of the facility's location had taken weeks of satellite surveillance and signals intelligence analysis. But Maria's eyewitness identification was the final piece needed to move forward with operational planning. "Now comes the difficult part," Major Kim said. "Planning an infiltration and extraction mission for a heavily defended underground facility with unknown numbers of prisoners and guards. The rescue operation would require coordination between special operations forces, intelligence assets, medical personnel, and logistical support. But the most challenging aspect was the time pressure. Every day of planning was another day that prisoners remained in captivity. Maria had continued providing detailed intelligence about guard rotations, security systems, and facility layouts. Her memory for tactical details had impressed even experienced special operations officers. "The guard change occurs every 6 hours," Maria explained to the assembled team. "But there's a 15-minute window during shift overlap when security is at its weakest. That would be the optimal time for initial infiltration." Commander Sarah Wilson, leader of the Special Operations Team, studied Maria's hand-drawn facility maps. "Lieutenant, can you estimate the number of guards we might encounter during different periods?" "During normal operations, probably 20 to 30 guards throughout the facility," Maria replied. But, if they detect an intrusion, they can bring reinforcements from the deeper levels within minutes. The rescue plan that was emerging involved multiple teams approaching from different directions. One team would create a diversion at the main entrance while another infiltrated through the emergency exit Maria had used during her escape. The biggest unknown is the current prisoner population, Colonel Hayes said. We need to be prepared for the possibility that there could be 50 or more people who need medical evacuation. Dr. Chen had been working with the military medical team to prepare for treating torture victims with various types of injuries. Maria's case had provided valuable insights into the medical challenges they might encounter. Based on what Lieutenant Santos experienced, we should expect prisoners with severe malnutrition, untreated injuries, and significant psychological trauma, Dr. Chen explained. Some may not be able to walk or may be too psychologically damaged to cooperate with rescuers. The medical aspect of the rescue operation was as complex as the military components. Transporting large numbers of severely injured prisoners from a remote location would require helicopter medical evacuation capabilities and field hospital facilities. Maria listened to these planning discussions with a mixture of hope and anxiety. She desperately wanted the mission to succeed, but she also understood the enormous risks involved for both rescuers and prisoners. There's something else you need to know, Maria said during one planning session. The facility has a protocol for emergencies. If they believe they're about to be overrun, they're prepared to destroy evidence and eliminate witnesses. This information added another layer of complexity to the mission planning. The rescue teams would need to move quickly enough to prevent the execution of prisoners, but carefully enough to avoid triggering the emergency protocols. How much warning time would they need to implement these protocols? Commander Wilson asked. Maybe 10 to 15 minutes from when they first detect an intrusion, Maria replied. But some of the deeper levels have independent communication systems. They might have more warning than we realize. Admiral Morrison realized that the rescue mission would need to be executed with perfect timing and coordination. Any delay or mistake could result in the deaths of everyone they were trying to save. We're going to need real-time intelligence during the operation, Admiral Morrison said. Drones, satellite surveillance, electronic monitoring of their communications. But, even with the most sophisticated intelligence assets, the success of the mission would ultimately depend on the courage and skill of the soldiers who would go into the facility to bring out the prisoners. Commander Wilson's team had been training intensively for the mission, using Maria's intelligence to create realistic simulations of the facility's layout and security systems. But everyone understood that no amount of training could fully prepare them for what they would encounter. Lieutenant Santos, Commander Wilson said, I have to ask, would you be willing to accompany the rescue team? Your knowledge of the facility could be crucial if we encounter unexpected situations. The request caught everyone by surprise, including Maria herself. The idea of returning to the place where she had endured months of torture was almost unthinkable. But the tactical advantages of having her present during the operation were undeniable. Dr. Chen immediately objected. Commander, Lieutenant Santos is still recovering from severe trauma. Returning to that facility could cause permanent psychological damage. But Maria was already considering the possibility. Doctor, I appreciate your concern, but if my presence could help save even one more prisoner, I have to do it. Admiral Morrison studied Maria's face carefully. He could see the fear there, but also the determination that had carried her through months of captivity and helped her escape. Lieutenant, I want you to think about this carefully, Admiral Morrison said. No one would question your courage if you decided that you've already done enough. You've provided intelligence that has made this mission possible. But Maria had already made her decision. Sir, I know that facility better than anyone. I know the sounds, the smells, the layout in ways that can't be communicated through briefings. If something goes wrong, I might be the only person who can adapt to unexpected situations. The psychological evaluation of Maria's fitness for such a mission would require careful assessment by military psychiatrists. But her willingness to return to the site of her trauma demonstrated a level of personal courage that impressed everyone involved in the planning process. Over the following days, Maria underwent intensive psychological and physical evaluations to determine her readiness for the mission. The results showed that while she still carried significant trauma, her mental resilience and tactical knowledge made her a valuable asset. "The decision is yours, Lieutenant," Admiral Morrison told her after reviewing the evaluation results. "But I want you to understand that if you choose to participate, you'll be going in as part of the rescue team, not as a patient or observer." Maria accepted the assignment without hesitation. "Yes, sir." "When do we deploy?" The final mission briefing took place in a secure conference room with representatives from all participating units. The operation, codenamed Sanctuary Recovery, would involve 60 personnel and multiple aircraft operating in hostile territory. H-hour is set for 0300 tomorrow, Admiral Morrison announced. Weather conditions will provide optimal cloud cover, and intelligence indicates reduced guard presence during overnight hours. Maria sat with Commander Wilson's Special Operations Team, wearing military fatigues and equipment for the first time since her escape. The psychological impact of putting on a uniform again was powerful, but it also restored her sense of identity and purpose. "Lieutenant Santos will accompany Team Alpha through the emergency exit route," Commander Wilson explained. "Her role is advisory and navigational. Under no circumstances will she be exposed to direct combat unless absolutely necessary." But everyone in the room understood that combat situations were unpredictable, and Maria might find herself in danger regardless of the careful planning. Dr. Chen approached Maria after the briefing. "I've prepared a medical kit specifically for you," she said quietly. "Medications for anxiety, pain management, and emergency treatments if you're injured." "Thank you, Doctor," Maria replied. "But I won't need the anxiety medication. I'm exactly where I need to be." As the teams prepared for deployment, Maria found herself experiencing a strange sense of closure. For months, her nightmares had been filled with images of the facility and thoughts of the prisoners still trapped there. Tomorrow, she would have the opportunity to transform those nightmares into a rescue mission. Admiral Morrison pulled Maria aside as the teams prepared to board their aircraft. "Lieutenant, I want you to know that your service has already gone far beyond what anyone could expect. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already honored your oath and served your country with extraordinary distinction." "Thank you, sir," Maria replied. "But this isn't about honor or service anymore. This is about bringing people home." The helicopter carrying Maria and Team Alpha lifted off just after midnight, beginning the journey to a remote mountain facility where Maria had endured unimaginable suffering. But this time, she was returning as a rescuer rather than a prisoner, armed with knowledge and determination that could save lives. As the aircraft flew through the darkness toward the target, Maria mentally reviewed every detail of the facility layout, every guard routine, every potential complication. She had survived her captivity by maintaining hope that she would someday help rescue the other prisoners. Tomorrow, that hope would be tested in the most dangerous mission of her life. But Maria Santos, lieutenant in the United States Navy, survivor of torture and human experimentation, was ready to face whatever challenges awaited. The scars on her ribs were physical reminders of what enemies could do to break the human spirit. But they were also proof that the human spirit could endure, survive, and ultimately triumph over even the most systematic cruelty. Tomorrow, those scars would serve as motivation for a mission that could save dozens of lives and deal a significant blow to an enemy operation that had operated in secrecy for too long. The battle to free the prisoners was about to begin, and Maria would be at the center of it, returning to the place of her greatest trauma to help others find freedom. The courage required for such a decision could only come from someone who had already proven that human resilience has no limits when motivated by the determination to protect others. As the helicopter flew through the night, Maria prepared herself for what might be the most important day of her life. The scars on her body told the story of her past suffering. Tomorrow's mission would write the story of her redemption and the salvation of others who had endured what she had survived. The helicopter touched down in a mountain clearing 3 kilometers from the target facility at exactly 0245 hours. Maria felt her heart racing as she stepped onto ground that was frighteningly familiar, even in the darkness. The last time she had been in this terrain, she was fleeing for her life as a half-starved escapee. Now she was returning as part of a meticulously planned rescue operation. Commander Wilson's voice crackled through her radio headset. "Team Alpha, we are go for infiltration. Lieutenant Santos, you're our eyes and ears from here forward." Maria led the 6-person special operations team through the forest using a route she had memorized during her escape months earlier. Every tree, every rock formation, every change in elevation was exactly as she remembered. The psychological impact of retracing her escape route was intense, but it also confirmed her navigational accuracy. "Contact in sight," whispered Sergeant Martinez, the team's point man. Through night vision goggles, they could see the dark outline of the facility's surface buildings nestled against the mountainside. Maria studied the scene carefully, comparing what she observed with her memories. "Guard positions look normal," she reported quietly. 2 sentries at the main entrance, 1 patrol walking the perimeter. Same pattern they used when I was held here. The rescue operation was proceeding according to plan. Team Bravo was simultaneously approaching the main entrance to create a diversion, while Team Charlie would infiltrate through the vehicle access road. Maria's team had the most difficult assignment, entering through the emergency exit she had used during her escape. There, Maria pointed to a barely visible opening in the rock face. "That's the emergency exit. It leads directly to the second underground level where most prisoners are held." The entrance was smaller than the special operations team had expected. Getting 6 fully equipped soldiers through the narrow passage would require careful maneuvering and perfect coordination. Sergeant Rodriguez, the team's demolitions expert, examined the entrance with portable sensors. "No electronic security on this access point," he reported. "But there's a steel door about 20 meters inside the tunnel." Maria remembered that door clearly. "It's usually unlocked during normal operations, but there's an electronic lock that can be activated remotely if they detect intrusions." The timing of their infiltration would be crucial. They needed to reach the steel door before facility security became aware of the rescue operation and activated emergency protocols. "Team Bravo reports they are in position for diversion," Commander Wilson announced through the radio. "Beginning Phase 1 in 60 seconds. Maria felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with memories of terror. Being back at this facility brought flashbacks of her months of captivity, but she forced herself to focus on the mission. Other prisoners were counting on her knowledge and courage. The diversion began exactly on schedule. Explosions echoed from the main facility entrance as Team Bravo created the appearance of a frontal assault. Almost immediately, Maria could see guards running from various positions to respond to the apparent threat. "Now," Commander Wilson ordered. "Alpha Team, you are clear for infiltration." Maria led the team into the narrow tunnel, moving by memory and instinct through passages she had navigated in complete darkness during her escape. The familiar smell of damp stone and stale air brought back vivid memories of her desperate flight to freedom. The steel door was exactly where she remembered, and, as she had predicted, it was unlocked. Beyond the door lay the underground facility where she had endured months of systematic torture and experimentation. "Guard station ahead," Maria whispered, pointing around a corner. Usually 2 guards, but they might have responded to the diversion. Sergeant Williams, the team medic, moved forward with Maria to assess the situation. The guard station was empty, with 2 chairs and monitoring equipment abandoned as personnel responded to the crisis at the main entrance. "Clear," Williams reported. Proceeding to prisoner detention area. Maria led them through corridors that she had memorized during her captivity. Each door, each corridor junction, each ventilation grate was exactly as she remembered. The facility appeared unchanged since her escape. The first prisoner cells came into view, and Maria felt her breath catch. Behind reinforced doors with small observation windows, she could see figures lying on metal bunks. Some appeared to be unconscious or sleeping, others were clearly awake but motionless. 12 cells on this level, Maria reported. Usually 1 or 2 prisoners per cell, depending on their condition. Sergeant Martinez began checking the electronic locks on the cell doors while Rodriguez prepared to override the security systems. The rescue team had trained extensively for this moment, but the reality of seeing actual torture victims was emotionally challenging even for experienced soldiers. The first cell door swung open, revealing a young man in military fatigues who appeared to be barely conscious. His eyes opened when he saw armed soldiers, and fear flickered across his face before he recognized their American uniforms. U.S. Navy, Sergeant Williams said quietly. "We're here to get you out." The prisoner tried to speak but could only manage a whisper. Months of captivity had left him severely malnourished and weakened. Williams immediately began medical assessment while the rest of the team continued opening cells. Maria recognized some of the prisoners from her time in captivity. Corporal Jackson, whom she had heard being tortured in adjacent cells, was alive but showed signs of severe psychological trauma. When he saw Maria, confusion and recognition crossed his face. "Santos," he whispered. "How, you escaped?" "I came back for you," Maria said simply. "All of you." The next cell contained a female soldier Maria didn't recognize, apparently from a different unit captured after Maria's escape. Her injuries were fresh, indicating that the facility's operations had continued uninterrupted. "Team Alpha, what's your status?" Commander Wilson's voice crackled through the radio. 12 prisoners located on this level, Maria reported. 7 ambulatory, 5 requiring immediate medical evacuation. No guard resistance encountered. But, even as she spoke, Maria noticed something troubling. The facility was too quiet, the response to the diversion too limited. Her experience during captivity had taught her to recognize patterns in guard behavior and facility operations. "Something's wrong," she told Commander Wilson. "Security response is too minimal. Either they're planning something or this isn't the main prisoner housing area anymore." Maria's instincts proved correct when Sergeant Rodriguez detected electronic signals from deeper underground levels. "Commander, I'm picking up communication traffic from lower levels. Sounds like they're coordinating some kind of response." The possibility that most prisoners had been moved to deeper levels since Maria's escape meant that the rescue mission was far from complete. The current prisoners needed immediate evacuation, but others might still be trapped below. "Team Charlie reports heavy resistance at vehicle entrance," Commander Wilson announced. "They've encountered more guards than intelligence predicted." Maria realized that the facility's defenses had been strengthened since her escape. Her intelligence had been accurate for conditions months earlier, but enemy forces had adapted their security procedures. "There's another level below this one," Maria told Commander Wilson. "I heard it during my captivity but never saw it. That might be where they moved the main prisoner population." The tactical situation was becoming more complex. Evacuating the current prisoners while simultaneously searching for others on lower levels would stretch the rescue team beyond their planned capabilities. "Priority is evacuating confirmed prisoners," Commander Wilson decided. "We'll assess lower levels after securing current survivors." But Maria knew that if they left without checking the deeper levels, other prisoners might be executed to eliminate witnesses. The facility's emergency protocols included provisions for destroying evidence and eliminating security risks. "Commander, I volunteer to check the lower levels while the team evacuates these prisoners," Maria said. "I know the facility layout better than anyone." The suggestion was tactically sound but extremely dangerous. Maria would be operating alone in hostile territory with limited backup support. But her knowledge of the facility made her the logical choice for rapid reconnaissance. "Negative, Lieutenant," Commander Wilson replied. "Your mission is complete. You've provided the intelligence that made this rescue possible." But Maria was already moving toward a stairway that led to deeper levels. "Sir, if there are more prisoners down there, we can't abandon them. I'm the only one who knows how to navigate those areas." Sergeant Williams finished treating the most severely injured prisoner and looked at Maria with admiration. "Lieutenant, you've already done more than anyone could ask. Let us handle the rest." "These people saved my sanity during the worst moments of captivity," Maria replied. "I won't leave anyone behind." Against explicit orders, Maria disappeared down the stairway toward unknown levels of the facility. She carried only a sidearm and radio, moving by memory and instinct through passages she had never seen but had heard described by other prisoners. The lower levels were more sophisticated than the upper areas, with advanced electronic security systems and reinforced construction. This was clearly where the facility's most important operations were conducted. Maria found a corridor lined with observation windows that revealed sophisticated laboratory equipment and medical facilities. The scope of the operation was far larger than anyone had suspected based on her upper-level intelligence. "Command, I've found the main experimental facility," Maria reported through her radio. "This is much bigger than we thought. Industrial-scale operation." Her transmission was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Maria pressed herself against a wall as armed guards passed her position, apparently responding to the rescue operation above. Following the guards led Maria to a large chamber containing dozens of cells arranged in multiple tiers. The prisoner population was far larger than intelligence estimates had predicted. "Command, I count at least 40 additional prisoners on the lower levels," Maria whispered into her radio. "Many appear to be civilians, not military personnel." The discovery changed everything about the rescue mission. What they had planned as a military prisoner extraction had become a major humanitarian operation requiring significantly more resources. "All teams, abort current missions and converge on Alpha's position," Admiral Morrison's voice cut through the radio chatter. "We're escalating to full facility seizure." Within minutes, the tactical situation shifted from a covert rescue to an overt assault. Additional aircraft arrived with reinforcements while Maria continued providing real-time intelligence from inside the facility. The guards Maria had observed were part of a much larger security force that had been prepared for exactly this type of intrusion. But the facility's operators had underestimated the determination of American forces to recover captured personnel. "Lieutenant Santos, maintain your position and provide guidance for reinforcement teams," Admiral Morrison ordered. "You've given us intelligence that will save dozens of lives." The battle for control of the facility lasted another 6 hours. When it was over, 73 prisoners had been evacuated, including military personnel from 4 different countries and civilians who had apparently been kidnapped for experimental purposes. Maria emerged from the facility as the sun was rising, walking alongside stretchers carrying prisoners she had helped locate. The scars on her ribs, which had provided crucial evidence months earlier, now seemed like badges of honor earned through service beyond the call of duty. Dr. Chen was waiting at the evacuation helicopter when Maria arrived. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Complete," Maria replied simply. "For the first time since my escape, I feel complete." Admiral Morrison approached as Maria was being checked by medical personnel. "Lieutenant Santos, your actions today have redefined what we understand about courage and military service." But Maria was already looking toward the helicopter carrying wounded prisoners to medical facilities. Her own trauma would require ongoing treatment, but watching other survivors begin their journey to freedom provided a sense of closure she had thought impossible. The facility was destroyed by explosives before the rescue teams departed, ensuring that it could never again be used for human experimentation. Intelligence recovered from the site revealed connections to international networks that would require years of investigation. Maria Santos returned to the Naval Medical Facility where her story had begun, but she was no longer just a survivor. She had become a symbol of resilience, courage, and the military principle that no one is left behind. The scars on her ribs would remain with her forever, physical reminders of unimaginable suffering. But they would also serve as proof that human beings can endure anything and emerge stronger, more compassionate, and more determined to protect others. Her story spread throughout the military community, inspiring changes in rescue protocols, prisoner treatment procedures, and intelligence-gathering methods. But, for Maria, the most important outcome was simple: 73 people were alive and free because she had found the courage to return to the place of her greatest trauma. The healing process would continue for years, both for Maria and for the prisoners she had helped rescue. But they would heal together, supporting each other through the challenges of recovery and the process of rebuilding their lives. Admiral Morrison kept a photograph on his desk from the day of the rescue, showing Maria Santos walking out of the facility surrounded by the people she had helped save. It served as a daily reminder that military service is ultimately about protecting and serving others, regardless of personal cost. The facility where Maria had suffered was gone, but the courage she had shown in returning there would inspire military personnel for generations. Her scars told a story of survival, but her actions during the rescue mission told a story of heroism that redefined what it means to serve with honor.